Hiba, welcome.
Hello, David. How are you?
Doing very well.
And
Hedy, welcome. Sama, welcome. Paula, Rafaela. Oh, what an amazing group of people. Hey, so I'm gonna stop talking actually, since I'm not actually speaking too much on the call. I'm just gonna say one last thing, and then I'm gonna encourage and welcome Stina, Simone, and Bilal to the call. I'm actually doing most of the talking. But just wanted to say quickly before we start with that this is a very participatory discussion, and we love hearing voices and seeing people. We're gonna have some breakouts, and during the breakouts especially, we encourage people to take part, to turn on their cameras and their microphones, and to join in like much of our workshops, our discussions, and much of how we perceive life is that the more that people participate and engage and put in, the more they get out. And with that, I'm going to turn off the music here and say how excited I am to be having this discussion with Stina and Simone from the Platform Design Toolkit and my dear colleague, Bilal. So I'll let you folks take it away.
All right, so welcome everybody. It's amazing, 6:22. What a beautiful time to start. Thank you, Simone, for picking 20. It's a non-traditional time to start, and I think it kind of helps people think a little bit differently, which is one of the things that we're trying to do here. We've met ages ago, back when I don't remember exactly how we met, but I think I remember the last time we met was at POC 21, which was a sustainability hackathon campout, and the ideas of the Platform Design Toolkit and some of these things around like new ways of doing business were definitely up in the air as we're trying to look for open source business models and different ways of addressing climate change in response to the COP21, kind of flipping it and bringing it to the people from the grassroots. And it was a really beautiful moment. And one of the things that I'd like to do is I'm actually going to start my presentation and share my screen. And I'm going to run over a really quick agenda. Do you mind if I share my screen? Or yeah, POC 21, we got some old POCers over here. Amazing. Let me get this in presentation mode. Oh, share, and then, oh, not that button. Sorry about that, you guys. It's present, it's not share. And then go to Zoom and share my screen. I think, excuse me.
Just for the records, I want to say that we are live streaming on YouTube as well. So if you guys want to share, the link as well, you can do that. I'm gonna put you into the chat, and I'm also recording, so we're gonna have this available later.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for doing that and for agreeing to be a part of this this webinar. I feel like it's going to hopefully provide a lot of really interesting insights and value as we're thinking about kind of different ways of doing business. Oh, wrong button. Can you guys see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So our agenda today is I wanted to let everyone know that we're going to be recording. We love seeing your faces and hearing you, so feel free to share. But if you feel like being private, you can always change your name and you can go anonymous, and you can not necessarily open your video because we are live streaming and we are recording. I want to let everyone know that we do this because not everyone can be here. We're working internationally, and so sometimes people are in India and they're waking up in the middle of the night to join the calls. So we want to make sure that the value that we're learning together here can be beneficial after our time together. We're going to really quickly go through our, wrong button, slides. Welcome, yes. So I wanted to start off with the quick introduction, and today's title is The Platform Design, New Business Models for a New World of Business. And this is the Pitchworthy team. We're a small team right now and hopefully growing pretty soon. There's Lara, Dara, me, I'm Bilal, and Munir, and we are working on tools to help unlock human potential to address global challenges. And we do that through the avenue of social entrepreneurship often. And one of the things that I'd like to ask you is, how do you want to show up for this call? And sometimes the way that we show up is the way that we intend to show up can really influence and affect the tone of the call. Whoops. So if you guys would like to chat or send a message in the box. Whoops, whoa, what's going on? So the way that I would like to show up is open, sincere, and I'd like to engage my learning hat, like be open to learning something new. You guys can feel free to type in the chat box. All right, so I see we have some people saying they want to be open-minded, listening, all ears, open-minded, beautiful, curious. I love that. The learning hat, yalla, we'll find you a learning hat. And so we also have a bunch of suggestions from our side. So first, how do you want to show up? But also we have some suggestions about how to have an amazing call. First, headphones, microphones, and muting. Keep your video on so that we can see each other. I can see Hiba and I can see John Boyd. Hello, and Marc Antoine. It's really great to see people. So keep your videos on if you can. And most importantly, let's have fun. And so Munir is going to be helping me today facilitate these breakout rooms. And like we mentioned, we have people from all over the world, from Rio to Lebanon to India. Let's meet each other in a really quick check-in. So the check-in could be a gratitude check-in or even just something that's on your mind today. And each person will have about 1 minute to share. And to make it very, very simple, we're just gonna go alphabetically. No, hey, who's gonna talk first? It's just alphabetically by first name. And Munir will let you know when the time starts and when the time is about to be a minute over. And you'll have check-ins every minute to know when to switch. Munir, are we ready with the rooms?
Hey, Bilal, can we, I actually, Zoom for some reason is not giving me the right to do breakouts now. So can we come back to that in a moment?
Yes, sure. No worries about that. Okay, so we'll get back to the breakouts in a second, and we'll move on to kind of why we've gathered here today, dearly beloveds, for a couple of reasons. Like we mentioned, Pitchworthy's goal of unlocking human potential for addressing challenges. We've partnered with the Asfari Foundation to bring about a challenge for Lebanon around education and lifelong learning and supporting social entrepreneurs who see problems in that space and want to find ways of addressing it. And the way it connects with the webinar we're about to have today is we want to find all sorts of novel ways of reducing inequalities and solving problems through business. And we really feel that Simone's and Stina's approach could be very helpful for the types of social enterprises and social entrepreneurs that are developing. So the main topics of the challenge, like I mentioned, are around education and lifelong learning. And we're going to save some space for questions at the end so that if we need to go a little bit longer about the challenge, to make some more room for the presentation. It's an accelerator, which means that there is some funding available once we get into the accelerator, and we're in the open house period. So right now we're reaching out, we're looking for people that have interesting projects. And just because the project is for Lebanon doesn't mean that you can't be a part of it. We're looking for people that can offer mentorship, support in like technical support, expertise, partnerships. And these types of, this type of network is really how we're trying to work globally to support locals in addressing challenges. So with that out of the way, and with kind of a context about the challenge that we're running and how these new tools can support people in addressing these challenges, I'd love to stop my screen share and turn it over to Simone and Stina to teach us a little bit more about the platform design toolkit and these new ways of doing business. I'm gonna stop my sharing right now. Are you guys ready?
Yes, Stina, can you take the flow and I will follow?
Sorry, you want me to share?
Yes.
Oh, I thought you said.
I mean, sorry, maybe better because if we go for the presentation just right after that, I will share my screen. Don't worry. So
Okay.
I got, sorry, I got it well. So just let me share my screen as well. Okay, just a second. Okay, so before we jump into the content, maybe let's take a minute to introduce ourselves. Stina, do you want to start with the introduction?
Well, I can. But my name is Stina Heikkilä. I joined Boundaryless, which is the company that is behind the platform design toolkit, about a year ago, after having worked for quite some years in development with big guys like the UN or the OECD and different, so on the multilateral government policy side, let's say. So I was very excited by the platform design toolkit and the potential to use it in order to unlock the potential of projects, of people, and opportunities, basically. So that's what I'm doing now.
Okay. Can you hear me well? Yes. Yeah. So, well, I'm Simone from Boundaryless as well. You know, basically, I started to investigate open business models and what does it take to create, you know, basically strategies that leverage and connect, you know, thousands of players, you know, to create either software or hardware or more generally services. Probably something like 15 years ago, and few years ago, I met Bilal. Bilal, the first time we met, it was at an event in New York when we organized the open source hardware documentation jam. It was an event to explore ways to describe and document open source hardware projects. In my past life, I also was co-chair of the Open Hardware Summit in 2014, if I'm not wrong. And yeah, basically, I started this project in 2013 just as a fork of the business model canvas. And from there, a journey started, and then we ended up with this company now made of probably something like 10 people and as a team. And we have a huge these numbers are pretty old. I don't know why, but basically we have now 50,000 users, more than 600 trained participants to our classes and boot camps. And we've been working with customers ranging from the UN to the small startups. So we have been able to really engage with this topic of platforms and ecosystem thinking very widely and deeply with many, many different stakeholders. So without further ado, let's jump into the topic. So the idea today is to share with you some very preliminary thoughts and information, let's say, and insights on what a platform is, what a platform strategy is, what world we are living, basically. In terms of how we organize in this digitally transformed world, so that we can also look at this topic, you know, not as a black box, but as something we can play with and we can understand, so that we can look into the practice of platform thinking, not necessarily, you know, just buying whatever comes from the market. You know, we want to play with that. We want to explore the real potential that this thinking provides us, and we will see at the end of the presentation that we are in a moment that calls for deeper invention of what we do with organizations, how we think about them. So let's take this approach. So platforms. In reality, let's say that we're talking about networks. So we're talking about this switch, let's say, between industrial age organizing and what we call post-industrial age, post-industrial age organizing. So when we talk about a platform, in reality, we are talking about organizations that depart from the idea to exist for the sake of controlling the means of production and controlling production in general, into a perspective of organization that essentially exists to facilitate and nurture interaction. So it's moving from controlling production into enabling interactions, because essentially what we are witnessing is this transformation between the pipeline, so where there's an organization that somehow controls production in a certain space or place, which not necessarily is a physical factory, but it can be also a bureaucratic, let's say, terroristic organization, into a perspective of organizations that exist to be orchestrators, so that the potential that is growing at the edge of systems can connect with the expectations that are growing more niche and more specific. We are pretty much familiar, I would say, with both the drivers and the enablers of this transition. And there's an enablers aspect that is related to what is now possible. So I would say the new possible, and it's heavily dictated by the pervasivity of these technologies, and not only technologies, but also the pervasivity of knowledge, let's say. So we have now distributed systems where you can do a lot by just using a very small machine, like a computer, a personal computer, or a mobile. And you can, with these machines, you can leverage and you can summon distributed infrastructures that are available on tap, let's say, you know. So now you can create a very, very scalable and powerful technological systems by just by a click on your mouse, through Amazon Web Services, for example, or Azure, or blockchains and whatever. And on the other hand, we also know that all knowledge is very much available at the moment. Today, we can access tons of open knowledge through, you know, Wikipedia is just a symbol here. Now you can learn everything basically just by connecting with your peers on the internet. And this revolution is coming to our desktop with manufacturing machines. Now, you know, I'm not going to focus on the idea of a 3D printer, but the question is that technology is becoming more democratically accessible, because we learned how to design in a modular way. We learned how to, you know, collaborate at scale, and so on. On the other hand, on the driver, let's say, side, so that what is culturally desirable, we are seeing somehow the you know, this the coming up of this idea of the long tail that really Chris Anderson created, this idea that Chris Anderson unveiled, let's say, more than 10 years ago. And now it's much clearer to everybody that essentially everybody wants something special. So we're no more fine with just consuming massive hits, let's say, a massive one-size-fits-all solution. We're looking for personalized experiences. Our lives are trying to be more specific, and we always want to access products and services that are tailored to our lives and expectations and capabilities to express ourselves. So this transition was captured quite fairly well by this book. But you know, there are many books, but this book was very interesting in a way that it categorized this transition as an imperative and not as an opportunity only, because we also need to understand that when we look into existing organizations, these organizations are being challenged by this transition. So there are incumbent organizations, for example, there are not just private ones, but also public organizations that we are used to connect for our needs, that are now really being challenged on this terrain. And these new coming entrants that are more able to leverage network connectivity to organize systems instead of industrialized systems. They are really putting a lot of pressure on incumbent organizations and institutions. So what we see basically in a very few words is a digitally transformed society where essentially you can see three types of players in the market. So you see increasingly this space of long tail, when you have consumers and producers connecting, looking for niche experiences. Then you see two more layers, which are just empowering and enabling these markets to to connect. Basically, you have the infrastructures, so the big infrastructures of the digital age. I mentioned Amazon Web Services, but you can think of I don't know, logistics providers, or other kind of institutions that provide modular services that are cheap and accessible, so that basically these organizers, these upstarts, and these new organizations can come up and aggregate markets, basically by connecting producers and consumers, leveraging on the technologies and the APIs and the modularities that all the infrastructures of the digital age provide. So if you look at the dynamics in the market, you will see that this niche space is fragmenting. And what does it mean, fragmenting? If you think about a very simple example, think about Airbnb. Now to play a role in the hospitality industry, you don't need to be very big. You can be very small. You can just have one room. So I remember in Barcelona when Airbnb started, there was one guy that was renting his I don't know what to say in English, but basically renting space for bags. So you just need a table or with some space, and then you can play a role in the hospitality industry. This is to say that the market for creators is becoming much more viable for small creators. So somehow, if you think about the past, this is very challenging for the incumbent institutions and organizations, because if your competition is much smaller, and because being small is much more sustainable, is much more practical, then it's going to be challenging, because the market is becoming not smaller, but it's becoming bigger, but made of smaller pieces. So this nicheification of the market. Now there are new niches that are emerging, making markets bigger, but all these opportunities are smaller. Okay, so what happens that the big organizations of the 21st century, they are looking to play these two roles, not just they don't want to be creators, but they want to be aggregators. They want to create spaces where you can connect as a consumer to your producers, or vice versa. They want to become the advisors and the agents of the small players. And of course, there is also the opportunity to enable with a more infrastructural role. And basically, aggregators and infrastructures are becoming bigger and bigger, so they are concentrating just because of two very basic rules. One is the economies of scale that I bet you are very familiar with. And one is the network effect, that in a few words, it means that in systems, in networks, when you add more users, the value perceived by a further user joining the system is higher. So technically, these aggregators, these networks that connect, become bigger and bigger, because as they grow big, the value perceived is much more attractive. So somehow we are seeing all the brands in the world trying to either play the aggregator role or the infrastructural role. Some of them are good enough to play both roles. Think about there's some noise in the background, so maybe if you guys can check and mute. So basically, if you think about Amazon, for example, Amazon is playing, all over the place. Is being an infrastructure, is being an aggregator, is doing a lot of different type of jobs. But normally, companies need to find a position in these one of these three layers. So, in more practical terms, doing the job of the aggregator, but in general, you will see that I didn't say any, I didn't use the word platforms yet, no, because what I normally refer to is not a platform in itself, but it's the platform age, so it's a way there, a way of thinking is a kind of more broader and pervasive transformation that entails, this layerization of the market. So normally, when you play the role of the aggregator, or I would say the platform, so if you play the role of the network that connects, and this role can be partially played at many levels. No, you can be a pure aggregator, or you can be an infrastructural aggregator, or sometimes you can be a niche aggregator, no, with a smaller market. But in any case, you need to play. You need to provide these three things when you aggregate and create a network or a platform, if you want, for your participants. You need to create a story, a narrative that essentially motivates everybody to join. I always say that when you play the role of the platform, it's not about telling people how cool you are. It's about telling people how cool they are, how great they can be if they are enabled and sustained to do that. On the other hand, you need to create these contexts and tools and technologies, like the language that they need to use, the rules that they need to follow, so that this context to play emerges and creates a space for everybody to be the best version of themselves. If we make a couple of, let's do a few examples, and then I will be better. I will be back on that. But if you look at the examples, of course, we are used to talk about Airbnb as a platform when you have host, experienced host, and guest connecting and producing and consuming. And on Airbnb, for example, you always look for the right apartment for you. You can look maybe for apartment which is in a special road or in a special place in the city, because maybe you need to go to that hospital to visit someone, or maybe you need to spend a week running an event somewhere else, and you need an apartment really near to there, and you need an apartment that is fit for your expectations and needs. Maybe you have kids, so you need a lift, and maybe you have a dog and you need a apartment with a garden. So your niche needs are expressed into this network, and often you find your perfect match. You find the other half of the apple, as we call it. But these dynamics are really, really playing out everywhere. So, for example, this is an example from our previous work with the NHS in the UK, where we helped an hospice to create a strategy to mobilize the social system around patients. In the case, it was end-of-life care patients. And we ended up in helping them to visualize and to define the strategy to create this portal called MyPulse, where you have volunteers and caregivers connecting with service providers so that they can provide the best services to chronically ill patients or end-of-life care patients. So the dynamics is the same, but the intent is completely different. This reconnects with what I was saying at the start. So let's understand the dynamics so we can put our intent in this. Stina, do you want to speak quickly about these other few examples? I will click for you if you ask.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this is really, we wanted to lift up some examples that are really what, like Simona was mentioning before, about not just accepting whatever comes from the market, but really also the opportunities that can be caught in the social impact and social business space. So this platform Speak is connecting people who have moved recently to a new city around language groups. So basically, in the different Speak chapters, there are different bodies that organize these meetups, conversational classes, let's say, with learners. So this is a way for people to get friends and also to practice the language, to learn the sort of the local culture. And eventually they can also start their own groups if there is an interest in that language and so on. So it's another example of how you can sort of evolve. The longer the platform goes, there are new things that that come up, and you can evolve your role on it as well. You can change the slide. So now this platform exists in 24 cities around the world, and have also started to create some meetups and retreats to connect all these people that are connected on the platform. So it's a good way to show how this dynamics can also help integration, which is something that many governments tackle to do. And I think you can go to the next. So another, we were mentioning how these traditional industries can be disrupted by platforms. So Wonder School is another example of how parents can be empowered to take a bigger role in choosing their childcare and homes and preschooling, and basically become even school directors themselves, and also finding schools closer to them, more convenient, with a improved communication and so on. So that's another example. You can move to the next, I think. There are many, I mean, the social entrepreneurs are very creative. So this is another example of a platform in France to tackle food waste. So basically by connecting buyers and local food vendors, that can be bakeries or hotels or restaurants, and supermarkets as well, that would otherwise risk to get rid of food that is close to expiry date. They can sell them on the app linked to the Too Good To Go platform, and that way save this food waste. And just to show in the next slide, the impact that they've measured for last year was that by selling 10 million of these food baskets, they could save 250,000 tons of CO2. So these are just really to highlight that these dynamics can be found in many different places, and can also not only lead to an increased market share for whoever runs the platform, but also to solve these complex social and environmental challenges that traditional businesses haven't been able to do.
Okay, so coming back to a couple of points that I wanted to make before, but better to start with examples. So essentially, all this platform thinking boils down to, at least, to simplify a little bit, to two core engines. So you have one engine which is about the transactions. So it's about how do you facilitate, these interconnectivity and exchange of value between producers and consumers in the niche. So how do you allow these two halves of the apple to connect? That's the point. So we said before, it's all about connecting the right producer with the right consumer. So they need the channel, they need the standardized transactions, and so on. So it's like, when you think about a city, it's like thinking about making the roads, for example. On the other side, you need also to have what we call the learning engine. So we need to have a system of acupunctural services that you provide to the participants in your ecosystem, so that they can be the best version of themselves, as we said before. So the idea is to really provide them with services that from time to time help them evolve and help them move to the next step. We made also a quick let's say schematization of these steps, and normally you start always with an onboarding moment where the entities from the ecosystem join the network, let's say, and so they need to start to have a transaction. And a good example of this is the photographer that Airbnb lets you find easily when you join the platform. Also, you need to have pictures done, so you don't know a photographer. So Airbnb is going to make it easy for you to find one and send it to you, and also let you take pictures at credit. So that's one thing. And then when you get better, you need services to support your evolution. So for example, again, if we keep the parallel of Airbnb, we can say that, for example, Airbnb provides you with co-host service. So if you, for example, you are renting a lot, your house or your room, but you don't have time because maybe you have, you know, your regular job or your kids or whatever, maybe you can have help from somebody else to do the check-ins and to manage all the process for you. And this is a co-host service. Then on the other hand, the last step is always a transformative one. So it's about really finding a new opportunity. So again, if we keep coming back to the example of Airbnb, which is easy, everybody can understand, being a co-host is essentially a transformative opportunity for a host. So if you, as a host, if you are very good, and if you have you know, lots of opportunities, and you kind of like the job of checking in and out people in Airbnbs, then you can start to offer these to other players, to other hosts from the network. So that's a transformative opportunity in the sense that it makes it possible for you to kind of create a new job that maybe you didn't have before. So in a world which is essentially under a ton of pressure because of all the disruptions that we see and all these changes, it's always a great opportunity to create, you know, to give opportunities to people to find new jobs, for example, to create new jobs. So that was just a reflection. I think I want to speed up so that we have more time for the rest. So just a last bit. So the idea is really to move from the perspective of customer problem and solution that all the business schools and the startup schools have been teaching to you know, most of the entrepreneurs. So the idea is, you know, you need to find a customer with a certain problem, and then you need to give them the solution that is better than all the existing solution, which is great. I mean, it's the basis of also our validation related thinking. But on the other hand, I think it's the time for us to recognize that the focus of our entrepreneurial work needs to be an ecosystem. So it needs to be an ecosystem that is trying to express a potential, a transformative potential, or a value exchange potential for which you can create a platform. So think about kids playing on the street, and you go there to the kids and say, okay, guys, I'm gonna give you a stadium and a championship and a referee so that you can express your potential at best. So the idea that we always explain is that platforms, differently from products, platforms are like amplifiers. So you can amplify music, but the music needs to be there. So you need to find the music, and then you can amplify that. And see, this is very similar to what you do with platform strategy. You need to find your ecosystem, understand how the ecosystem is trying to change value, amplify that through creating new channels and creating services for continuous improvement and learning. So that's more or less the difference, and that's my last slide. That's more or less the difference between what an industrial organization is and what a platform organization is. So a platform organization, differently from the industrial organization, is much more focused on economies of scope. So personalization, long tail, half of the other side of the hairpole, as I said. It targets both sides. So it targets both, not just the consumer, but also the producers of value. It wants to empower, and especially empower a potential that is yet unexpressed. So it's really about amplifying, you know, this idea of connecting a potential that is awaiting to flow in the system, like when you have a circuit, you know. And then it provides not just products to consume, but services that support the participants' ability to serve each other and to learn, essentially, to improve. So that's where we are. Now we are in a world of continuous pressure because of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, as everybody knows, and things are getting worse. No, I'm going to share also these a few slides on you know, adding just a final reflection. Things are getting worse, but I mean, not because we are pessimistic, but because the interconnected nature of our work, the work that we created, is a world that is prone to generate crises, to generate problems, issues that we need to take on. And everybody's talking about, for example, climate change, and we know that everything is going to change. So there's literally no perspective where we don't have any disruption or change. So we have either extreme impacts or extreme adaptation needs. But for example, what would it mean to adapt to something that changes? This excellent example from Stina that she let me think about. It's really about being able to see that the perspective, the context of our lives are now going to be much more, I would say, volatile. Think about what's happening these days with the coronavirus outbreak. We don't know what to do, and we need to change all the plans, and we need to change our business models. For example, for a company like ours, thankfully we have this huge network of people, a huge network of trainers and team and community, so that we can reorganize locally. But many companies that have very high dependence on certain aspects of the supply chain, they need to change completely their business model in the wake of this crisis. So the message is that what we're going to see in the future is much more about organizing that organizations, because organizations themselves are concepts, artifacts of the industrial age. So we're going to see much more organizing and much more self-organizing around especially the basic elements of our economy. So the basic services of our economy, thanks to, for example, new technologies like blockchain that allow people now to play the role of also of the investor, of the founder, or the decision maker, not just the producer or consumer. So hopefully we're going to see much more alignment within the interests of producers and consumers, so that they can self-organize parts of the future. So the platforms of the future are much less about I don't know, maybe much less about travel or mobility, but much more about and also about the basics of our societal lives. So it's really about education. It's going to be about food, how we take care of each other, how we create personal services that are heavily dependent on our local communities, for example, and so on. So that's more or less, and I think we have been quite long already. So that's more or less what we wanted to share with you as a start.
That was quite a start. I think I'm full of questions myself. I wanted to know if you wanted to take some questions now, or do people have questions in the room? You can
I'm happy to take some questions now, and whatever you guys want to proceed, however you want to proceed.
Okay, I just want to check in. Are we good on the webinar? Sorry, the breakout rooms? Because one of the things that might be interesting is to kind of take these ideas and to reconsider how we're thinking about business. But I think first, let's get some clarity. So we have a question here from Susan. What are the biggest challenges that must be solved to support producers and consumers? What are the biggest challenges? We could take that at face value. Do you have a response to that about negotiation?
Okay, sorry, I didn't get that you were asking to me. So what are the biggest challenges that must be solved to support producers and consumers? How do they negotiate? So first, before asking responding to this question, David, I will make you host after this Q&A, so that you can manage the breakout rooms. So how do they negotiate? This is an interesting question. I think one way to address this is to talk about what we call the designing for disobedience. So when you design a system like a platform, you want to achieve super scalable and large a large number of players, simply because if your system is dependent on network effects, so it gets better as it gets bigger, you want to have many users and many organizations, many entities in your ecosystem to engage in the interaction. So to have many, you need to design something that is dramatically simple. It needs to be almost stupid. Like 3 steps, all the same for everybody, very clear. You need to define scalable experiences, okay? But so how do you define something that is very stupid and simple, and at the same time, you factor in the need to tailor these interactions between people or small organizations or small entities? And you do that essentially by doing one thing, which is letting them self-organize on top of a basic system that lets them the space to hack the system sometimes, to be disobedient to the system sometimes, so that they can negotiate their perfect agreements between them. So you don't try to help them negotiate, you just make a space for them to negotiate. This, I would say, piggybacks on the idea of user innovation toolkits that somebody will remember from MIT, an MIT scientist that created this idea, no? And I always have, I always forget his name. Well, I will get back on that. But basically, there is this idea that when you create a product, if the product is hackable, then the people and the company will make the same amount of innovation during the product lifetime. They will spend the same amount of money on innovating the products, basically. So similarly, platforms need to be loose enough so that they can capture these innovations and institutionalize them within time. So that's how you make them negotiate. You just make space for them and listen to what they're doing. So, Eric von Ippel, thank you, Marc-Antoine.
So we have another question here in the document is, how would you differentiate between a platform or a multi-sided market, 2-sided, 3-sided?
Yeah, I don't, because I don't care about the words. I just care about trying to understand what's going on in the world. So for me, you will find the tons of taxonomies. The important thing, you understand what you're talking about. So there are dynamics of marketplace in every organizations at the moment, dynamics of platform infrastructure. So for example, learning services, those can be provided at any company. So when we studied platforms, we identified 6 platform plays. So 6 strategic transformations of the value chain that platforms do, okay? So you can have a platform, maybe just apply one of these transformations. For example, if you standardize transactions, you're already doing platform thinking. If you focus on, I don't know, if you take the suppliers that normally in your industry are hidden by incumbents and you make them visible and you design for them, you are doing platform thinking. We have a list of 7 principles of platform thinking. One of them is, for example, it's called design as a whole. Think as a whole. Even if you think as a whole, you're just doing platform thinking. So again, let's try not to fall into the trap of this is the description, this is a platform, this is an aggregator, this is an infrastructure, because there will always be something different.
Wow. I really appreciated that. Forget the taxonomy, try to understand the changing world and the reality of the world as it's changing. So
taxonomies are essentially, just to add on this very quickly, taxonomies are very similar, or I say they are an expression of rationalism, which is not really the best tool to use when you deal with a complex world. So the less you taxonomize, the more you will be going to understand what's going on.
Amazing. So we have actually a lot of questions in the document, and I want to give people an opportunity to vote on them. And I'm just gonna ask the last question that we have over here from John. Maybe I can find a simplification of it. While everyone else, please go to the document and vote by putting an X after it. So you can just put an X after the question that you like, and I'll count the X's. So from John, he's asking, have you been thinking about how you can have distributed platforms which enable various parties to add functionality to the platform in order to enable different types of interactions on the platform that fall within a certain context? It sounds like you were answering that in the hackability component. As an example, the context could be construction, and maybe the functionalities to enable the main contractor on a development to be able to find window installers because they're working on a location that is different from the normal area.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, you know, in general, platforms have different shape. You know, networks have different shape. Some of these networks are more distributed, more local. Others are more centralized, more global. So, for example, a company like Uber has a very specific locally bounded platform. So you cannot drive your taxi or your car. If you are based in Rome, you cannot drive your car in Paris. So each platform has a different shape. Each network has a different shape, and the network effects are affected by this shape. So, for example, companies or organizations that are trying to address network shape similar to what Uber is doing. They have issues, for example, and you know, for example, they tend to coexist with other companies just because the nature of these markets is much less globalized, is much more localized. With new technologies such as, for example, I don't know, blockchain, for example, what we're going to see a much broader push towards platforms that move more at a protocol layer. So they move more they become more as a language than anything else. And but we're gonna see the same dynamics. So, for example, when you think about now about the learning services that a platform can provide centrally, you know, like for example, to help you become better at what you do inside the platform strategy. In the future, we're going to see much more of these services provided directly from a local ecosystem or from a distributed ecosystem, because it will be easier to code and to make it possible for people to somehow exchange and connect and invest on a local level. So, or local, I mean, not just from a geographically perspective, but also from a context or tribal perspective. So, you know, there is a lot of thinking that we have been doing in this direction, especially in trying to mix platform thinking and crypto tokens and what these technologies make it possible. So you can check out on our blog. There will be, and we can also share it with you guys, so you can maybe circulate those links and people can play with that.
All right, so we actually have some votes in for 2 questions. I think let's start with the first one. It goes, is this process making it easier for people who are disenfranchised to participate in the economy?
Well, to some extent, I think it is, because somehow people get disenfranchised sometimes because of, for example, because of existing barriers. No, for example, you know, you have incumbents or regulations that or even, you know, some investment barriers, like, you know, for example, what Spotify has been doing for music. You know, now you just need to you can make music and then you just distribute your music to everybody in the world just with a click. You know? So the question is, these technologies are making it possible for people to be more engaged or to find new opportunities for engagement, because they normally reduce barriers. They make it easier for people to participate, you know. But at the same time, again, we cannot just hand wave, you know, and say, okay, that's great, you know, platforms are making people are removing barriers for people. But that's not just the point, because I used to say that what we are witnessing, for example, with some of these large scale platforms and networks, creating, some relevant externalities in our cities, for example, is because if it's a huge policy making failure that we are witnessing. A couple of days ago, Cory Doctorow said that not regulating, for example, is just, it's not a, it's a choice. If you don't regulate, you're gonna embrace a laissez-faire approach. So the question is, platforms are very, technologies are very good, and platforms as organizational artifacts are very good at making more people, making more easier for people to access opportunities. But at the same time, they are creating more challenges for regulators. And I think the last connection that is going to somehow solve this conundrum is when regulators as well, or in general, when our public institutions are going to be reorganized and rethought in light of the new possibilities that platforms provide. So we're going to have, you cannot have a platform world regulated by industrial institutions.
Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Because I think the example that Simone was mentioning, that we have done work with the UNDP on unemployment. So working with a government that is trying to solve the issue of unemployment, and especially, I mean, it's very popular to focus unemployment on youth. So how to get youth into employment, and maybe those that have been long-term unemployed are even more difficult to reach. And by using the platform design, it's also about opening up your eyes for things that you don't expect to happen. So I think linking back to what Simone said, it's more like a mindset and a methodology. And of course, the platforms are not a silver bullet at the end. But what happened in that work was that the legislator or the policymakers realized that they didn't take into account the entrepreneurial willingness, let's say, of the youth. That maybe instead of having a job, you need support to expand your micro business, for instance. And that's maybe not in a traditional unemployment service package encouraged or included, because maybe the people on the other side, they are not used to that, and they think in different ways. So I think it's also that the shared language of the platform and the way of sensing the ecosystem is really powerful for that purpose.
Yeah, also last a bit on the regulation part, because I believe it's very important to clarify what's going on. If you guys have time, check out the latest presentation from Benedict Evans at the World Economic Forum. And he just basically explained very quickly and in a very clear way that what we are witnessing essentially is the next wave of innovation is going to be about just not about smartphones, not about the new, I don't know, IoT, whatever. It's going to be about just the internet coming out of its infancy. So what we are witnessing now is a pervasive, let's say, a pervasivity of the internet in all aspects of society. So everything is going to be organized with platforms. Just because platforms are expression of our capability to organize in low transaction cost, in scale, in networks, and so on. So the next wave of innovation is going to be about how we control this process of pervasively putting internet everywhere and in everything we do. And this is going to need lots of care and lots of capability to regulate in new, smarter ways. So that's the next wave of innovation. It's going to be about regulating an internet that is going to be pervasive to every aspect of our society.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and we have a lot of amazing questions. And we did have an idea that we could actually break out and discuss. And I think, as facilitator, I think that I should get feedback. The people that are on this call should decide. We can pick questions, or we can break out and spend 5 minutes thinking about our individual projects, meeting each other, and then sharing some of the insights that we have gained from this conversation as it relates to our projects. Do you prefer that we continue with questions, or would you like to break out for the last 10 minutes and then come back and share with each other? We can, please just type in. It's also, of course, like we're co-facilitating this, Simone and Munir, like your continue with questions. Okay. Great. So we're seeing a lot more questions. Okay. So have you guys been voting on the table? Both have value, but I would tend towards breakout. Okay, so okay. Also, what I'd like to share with everyone is I already made the link for webinar 3 on our platform. It's a very simple platform. It's just Discourse. And this is where if we wanted to discuss our projects as it relates to this, feel free to create topics underneath the main category. I'll send an email showing you how to do that. We can continue the discussion virtually, and let's continue with questions now. Does that sound good for everyone? Okay, great. So over here in our list, it looks like the second question with the most amount of votes are there examples of nonprofits or commons-based platforms, and how are they financed?
Well, there are a few examples which are growing by the day. There is, for example, an entire movement of so-called platform co-ops, as many of you, I guess, know. So this is a movement that is growing, and you know, for example, there is this yearly conference that happens every year in New York, and this year was very big and very interesting, and there's a lot coming up. So if you want to check this out, you go for platform co-op and you will find everything. Excellent work. And how they, you know, some examples I can do for you know, sometimes they are created as an alternative to existing platforms. So, for example, there is a lot of talking. There was a lot of talking about fair, so-called fair BNB, you know, which is the fair alternative to Airbnb, you know. For example, in this case, there's a mechanism for people that book rooms in Airbnb to share some of the money that they invest is going to be reinvested in societies, let's say not society, but local social impact projects, let's say. Okay, so there are examples how they're financed. Yeah, in many ways. Sometimes they are, as I said, they are co-ops, so they have private funding. Some of the times they have, some of the platforms are using a very interesting pattern called steward membership. So, sorry, steward ownership. So basically, the mechanism is a mechanism for which you can still get money from investors, but with an agreement to pay back this money to a certain extent, and then the company becomes the owner of it itself. So somehow, different mechanisms to still get some venture funding in traditional ways, but then the company somehow buys back these shares and doesn't need to fit into this continuous perpetual flow of investments. So that's another prospect. Another, which is quite promising, is crypto, as you know. So basically, what crypto makes it possible is to there is an excellent graph that I think we can find. But basically, if you look up for why crypto networks are a breakthrough in open network design, from this post, you will see that there is now basically the possibility with crypto to provide people with financial incentives. Sorry for the light. Financial incentives when in the starting moments of creating a network, there are less user incentives. So, for example, if you go to Airbnb the week after it's created, you won't find any room, you know, so you don't find much value in it as a user. So how do they play with that? They basically tell you if you join in the first week, you're gonna become owner of a small part of the company. No, so somehow you can put some financial incentives at the start when the user incentives are not yet there. There is and yeah, Chris Dixon. So there is a lot of very interesting work that is coming up. You can look up some a blog from Jesse Walden that, if I'm not wrong, it was him that was explaining how crypto networks are somehow an evolution potentially of the cooperative movement. So you can think about cooperatives on steroids, basically based, a cooperative using technology that can, somehow fragment, all these ownership tokens into many people. So there are many ways. I think the question is not just about how do you finance something, but how do you run something. So the question is not just about the ownership, but it's about the figure and the idea of enterprising. So it's really about how do you find a way to, there's a reason for people to become entrepreneurs and to make these asymmetric bets on creating something new in the world and to put all this energy into creating something new because they see the potential to monetize what they do. Okay. So the question, when you take over the ownership possibilities and you liquefy the ownership, then you need to find a way to motivate people. So most likely you're going to have different enterprises if you have different incentive structures. So we need to play with this, but we need to be carefully aware that it's not just a matter of ownership. It's also a matter of design. It's a matter of passion. It's a matter of entrepreneurship. It's a matter of many things. So one thing that, for example, the platform co-op movement, I think, didn't get well at the start and still partially fails to understand is that it's not just about the governance models, it's not just about the ownership models, but it's about how do you execute a great idea and how do you motivate people to make it happen. So those are all interconnected topics.
Thank you so much. And if you feel like checking out the questions, because we have a lot of amazing questions, and I'd love to get more votes, more eyes on picking one. One of them that also has a good number of votes is how does the platform-based market forces change the idea of the greatest good for the greatest many guided by the invisible hand? So this is like previously the philosophy of like economies supporting society was, market forces will support everyone. But it turns out like that didn't really actually happen. Is that possible in a world of platform-based economics?
Well, platforms are just a symptom of where we are with the world, and we are in this world. And Stina, please jump in if you want to share some of your experience with your OECD or in general your thoughts on this. So again, platforms are a symptom. Platforms are just an expression of what technology makes possible, and the question is, we live in a world of rivalrous interests. So our world is essentially a world where everybody is confronting each other. You see that, competition is in the workplace, competition is in your house, competition is in your city, competition is in the world. Every city wants to be better than the other. Every nation wants to be better than the other. So essentially, what we have now, it's a world where we have increasing capabilities, technological capabilities, and we are essentially creating, able to create a bigger and bigger harm with our organizations. For example, you create Airbnb becomes a huge behemoth and transforms all the cities in Europe and creates crazy gentrification effects and makes a lot of damage together with making a lot of fun and letting lots of people go on holidays and having fun with friends and getting to know each other and new people and creating new ways to experience the world. So again, this is a question of regulation, and a question of regulation is a question of what kind of institutions that we have, and what do we expect as humans from the human experience. So the word is somehow an effect of how we behave, and at the same time, it shapes our behaviors. This is Marshall McLuhan points, and you know it very well. So the question is, we don't know how to move forward. We don't know how to regulate such a word, because we are dealing with the complex complexity. We are dealing with a very complex world. So we need to be able to reinvent our institutions. And my bet is that our institutions are not going to be centralized. So we need to figure out how to regulate by ourselves. And the first thing you need to regulate is what you expect from the world. If you expect to travel 15 times a year on a plane to go on holidays, you don't want to complain about Airbnb, which is because Airbnb is just something that you are making possible, and you are asking the world to make for you.
Wow. First thing to regulate is yourself. That is definitely a take home for me.
I mean, there is an excellent book from Wendell Berry that I would really suggest to all these people in this call. That is called I don't remember the title. I have it somewhere here. I don't remember the title of my memory now, but basically he explains very well that there is only a certain amount of change that we can proxy to organizations. There's a lot of change in the world that you cannot proxy to how do you design or run an organization. It's all about how you show up in the world and what you expect from the world. And it's how you relate with the world. So there is no way that we can regulate something or the economy of the world just by overimposing industrial regulations. We really need to change our expectations.
Stina, it seemed like you wanted to jump in on this one.
Well, I want to say, I think it goes back to it's hard to sort of make the ethics of platform, because there are many examples that get into the spotlight. Like I was reading another question of where it's good for the employees, and I think it's so one of the main changes from the greatest good for the greatest many, I guess, is this idea of mass personalization that the platforms allow. So it's no longer just providing commoditized goods or commoditized whatever so one size fits all, but it's really about allowing people to connect, so to find their niche needs met by a niche producer. But the problem then being a social one, when our perceived need in a consumerist society creates a huge social impact. So let's say that if we are not aware of what happens behind the scene, then it's hard to make this like ethical choice of a niche need in a way. So it comes back to what Simone said as well. If we want to have our holidays and go on holidays often to have more and more special experiences, then we have to be aware of the impact that could have as well. And I think that goes for also other platforms. I mean, if you if you have an alternative to ride with a platform co-op taxi company, personally, I would rather prefer that than to jump in an Uber, for instance. So I think it's a lot resonates. But one of the big changes now is that it's possible for people to become taxi drivers without having to inherit the license to drive a taxi or to buy a very expensive taxi driver license. So that's a big difference.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Is everyone aware that we have the questions page where we can take notes on the answers as well as vote on the next questions? I just want to make sure that we have that here. And actually, you know what? Since we're not able to do the breakout rooms, I still miss you guys. I still miss hearing your voices. And I'd love to offer a space for someone to ask a question with their voice. If anybody wants to step up. Or we can continue to pull from the document. Tudor, Mihaela, are you here? Maya, are you asleep yet? Okay. Yeah, I guess we'll oh, she's not asleep. Do you have any questions? I'd love to hear your voice. I really feel like this has been a conversation that we're having through text, and as much as we love platforms of technology, we also love to hear people. So if anybody wants to ask the next question, otherwise I'll go to the document.
I have a question which you know, came up a little bit in, well, a lot of our work in these sort of developing economies is thinking how people start small. You know, a lot of the examples we look at are the Ubers and the Airbnbs and these kind of daunting examples of these, you know, global giants that then mobilize tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, and that are sort of far out of the reach, and also are kind of the models that we don't necessarily want to be embracing for a lot of the issues that we're talking about, but we also see a lot of these efficiencies that come from that scale. And so I'm wondering if there are some tips for people who are, you know, starting out in less resource-rich environments, that are starting out, who want to, you know, grow something, but maybe in these, you know, less advanced innovation ecosystems, for building this sort of more positive experiences and more positive models for enabling these sort of more balanced economies by using these tools as well.
Well, I mean, there are several points on that. So first of all, one thing I think we need to start from is that as an Italian sociologist called Franco Cassano used to say, as long as we don't look at the south of the world south, the global south, as a not yet developed north, we can start from a new basis. So we need to understand, for the first thing we need to understand is that these models, they are just an expression of a certain way to think about innovation and the society and the success and the work. Okay, so when you start to look into the lives we live, the situation, the societies we live, and then you see, for example, the value in your local culture. For example, I speak as a Mediterranean. And in Mediterranean thinking has lots of potential to deal with what we are living. I think we are the only ones, or the few among the few ones, that we are pretty much used to incorporating tragedy. So somehow we are more tool to deal with these crazy times we live. No? So these elements of culture, they need to be embedded in our ideas of organizing and organizations and platforms. So somehow I think that models like Uber, or in general, these kind of very successful global models, they can be very misleading, you know, because they may project our entrepreneurial work into the wrong direction. It's just like drinking the Kool-Aid of you know, I want to make another Uber, or in general, I want to mimic this you know, overarching and globalized thinking. And one very important thing I think we need to do is to understand that the future of our organizing is going to be much more dependent on our cultural and local context. So it doesn't need to be monolithic. It doesn't need to be universalized, because technology has been the universalizing project of modernity. So the question now is, how do we break from these frames? You know, there are many frames we need to break.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to like really ask you to dive into that a little bit. You're right that technology seems to globalize, and processes and systems of like simpler interfacing has made McDonald's able to, you know, franchise and scale and clone, and you talked about AWS being like a really you know, a platform that's really growing, and it seems that there's these feedback loops that kind of encourage the centralization process. So as you're kind of describing the world as it is and how technology makes these platforms possible, what do you think is making it possible for breaking that self-reinforcing ballooning and seeing more local platforms, smaller scale things happen as well?
Yeah.
Like, what are the forces that make that happen versus Amazon taking over absolutely every platform and Google taking absolutely every platform, because they have their hands in all the pots, and that means that they're going to be able to have their hands in the next pots. Does that make sense?
If you, yeah, sure, totally. I mean, if we make our objective to make the next Uber or the next Google or the next Amazon, you know, there's no way we can do that, because somehow when you deal with these globalized systems, its concentration is natural. So it's not that they are concentrated because they are bad, or it's not that you know, Airbnb tends to grow bigger and bigger because of they are doing good marketing. They grow bigger and bigger because it's the nature of how we organize through network effects. So as long as we are creating a platform that provides us with exceptional international travel experiences, it's totally normal that it has this shape. It's centralized. It's really, you know, somehow a normal dynamic. Okay. So the question is to really embrace and identify these new opportunities that are more human, more local. The first thing we need to understand is how do we I would say, for example, how do we create a new constituencies to create these new platforms? So who is going to create this platform? No, if we talk about a local platform, for example, maybe we need a different identity that creates the platform, and this identity can be a local community, or it can be a regional player, or it can be maybe our city or town. So maybe the platform we can create, it's also going to be created through a different design process. And it's a design process that deals much more with creating a different discourse and a relational process that can facilitate the emergence of this new subjectivity, a collective subjectivity, a local subjectivity. So the question the point that I want to make here is that I'm not going to gild the pill. So what do we need now is really to create a design process and to engage with a design process that is radically different from the traditional process of, you know, creating an idea, putting money into that, making it happen, and pushing it into the world. You know, because otherwise, you know, you cannot complain that I don't know, if you play in the universalized, globalized, technologically driven, experience-driven world, you're not going to make something different from Airbnb, because Airbnb is the perfect fit for that world. It works along those lines. I don't know if I explain what I mean. So that's why my critique, for example, for companies or initiatives a little bit like Airbnb, you know, I don't think it's really intelligent to say, we're going to make, you know, I love the project, I love this idea, but it's never going to work. Because if you do something that it works in the same level, in the same context, and it provides the same experiences, you're always going to be not good enough.
Yeah, I think I'm beginning to understand where that space for the local and the relevant is we talked a little bit about, you know, I just read a book on caffeine and the relationship between caffeine and kind of the mindset and like the shift in culture that happened when like beer breaks were replaced with coffee breaks, and kind of it's I'm just, you know, I think it's so interesting because this idea of it's like Uber, but is often heard in ecosystems when they look towards these ecosystems that are kind of a hallmark of success in today's societies, like is basically financial success, like the unicorns and these businesses that have been able to balloon, and they draw admiration, and admiration is looking to replicate. But it's really interesting to think of like what could be this idea of Mediterranean culture. You know, what is it about these cultures that can offer a different approach of viewing the self and the world that makes a tomorrow possible? Because the current global perspective that's drawing attention and drawing accolades and resources is consuming itself. And so it's kind of interesting to think of like, no, like taking a stand as a local different way rather than a not yet global north, is like, what does the global
think about frames, you know? So you know, we think about organizing, and platforms are just a way to organize. It's just a new way that we learned is possible to organize when you have these technologies available and so on. So we have several frames when we think about organizations and platforms as well. So one frame maybe is capitalism and somehow venture capitalism. So if you remove that frame, you can start thinking about cooperatives, for example. But then there are other frames that you can remove. And for example, you can remove one frame that is monolithic, universalized idea of modernity. If you remove that frame, the question is, what becomes possible? What enterprises can you create if you remove this frame of universalized, technologically driven experience economy and, you know, whatever, no? So it's really about, you know, there are other frames that you can even remove. You can even remove the frame of, I don't know, perceiving yourself as a rationalist thinker. And then maybe you can think about what kind of organization I can design if I start from example, from a non-dual perspective, from a Buddhist perspective. I don't know. So all these frames can be removed. So the question is, when you understand the technique, which is platforms, network effects, I know how they work, I know the technology, what can I think about? What can I imagine as an entrepreneur if I remove all these frames that have been constraining my thinking for so long?
So we're nearing the end of our time together, and I definitely have a ton of food for thought. We're getting a lot of people really being so grateful for your time, but are leaving. And I wanted to remind people that please leave feedback. We'd love to know. I just put in the link for the feedback form, and we'll send it in an email. Also, there's that bit.ly to the community page. If you met anybody here, if you wish you were able to connect more, you can just start commenting on the thread. We're compiling all the links over there. Yeah.
Bilal, if I have 1 second, maybe we can use it to go back into more practical advices.
That would be awesome,
because we have been talking a lot about philosophy, which is I think really important, something that we cannot anymore consider as a kind of academic topic. Now it's a moment in which we need to start getting back to philosophy, okay, to really think through what we do. And but when I wanted to share some kind of practical note with the teams and the entrepreneurs connected. So this is our website. You know, remember that all our tools are open source. You can just download them. You know, with the download of the toolkit, it comes a very good guide, so you can use the user guide and self-learn. We have now it's a bit slow, but that's it. We have training events all over Europe and the world. Sometimes we are working to launch an online training process for letting more people to join our community. It's going to happen then probably in the next quarter. There are also online versions you can play with the canvases on an online remote board. So if you have a distributed team, you can work online. Also on our website, sorry, on our blog, there are lots of very good, I think, resources for you, both on the philosophical side, but also on the practical side. You have, for example, here in the homepage, you can find a full example explained, demystification of network effects. You can find lots of practical advice. And if you don't find anything that fits with your expectations, just write us and we help you to navigate the enormous amount of stuff that is on our blog. I think we are more than 100 articles on the blog. So I'm really happy if we can help you guys to locate what you're looking for, but know that all our work is open source. All our work is available for you to use, and with no blockage.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing all those resources. We'll put all of that into the community page with all the links to the books and references. There's the last thing that we really like to do is a group selfie, and to remind people to go to the feedback form, and that we'll be sending some follow-ups. And I wanted to remind people about why we're doing all of this. So we are supporting social entrepreneurs, especially in Lebanon right now, through this program called the Asfari Challenge for Social Innovation, for people that are doing cool things in Lebanon around education and lifelong learning. If you think you could be a mentor, if you would like to be a mentor to somebody trying to rethink education in a challenging environment, sort of like Lebanon these days, you can check it out at pitchworthy.org/Asfari, and you could sign up as a mentor. Or if you know somebody in Lebanon who's working on education and you're watching this video, share the link with them. We will be sharing content like this, new lessons, new learnings about the transforming world and how to create value. And one of the most important things that we can create is these networks of support. Networks of support where knowledge and access to high quality education and encouragement is available for anybody anywhere. So remember to check out pitchworthy.org/Asfari. I just put the link over there. I'm going to ask if we could all turn on our videos for those that are left, and we're going to take our team selfie. It's something that, people in the Middle East definitely love to do at the end of a workshop or a webinar. We all take a group photo. This is our chance to do that online. So let's see, do we have a good gallery view? Hey, everybody that's here. Oh my God, it's amazing.
We have a great gallery view. And if people, just want to turn on
there's still a bunch of you guys here. Awesome. We'll be putting you guys on the community platform so that you can see yourself, tag yourself, send the link to your mom and be like, look, Mom, I'm famous. Thank you again, Simone and Stina, and to the whole platform design team for sharing so openly what's happening. I used to think that you were creating something to make change happen, but I'm learning that you're describing what is happening because of the transforming technology and the world that we're living in, and putting the responsibility on us and as citizens of a planet to think about how we want to respond, how we want to change regulation, how even the processes for adopting regulations can change to make sure that the shift in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship and business is good for more of us. So I'm really glad that we brought up some of these challenges of the global South versus the global North, and the agnostic nature of these platforms. And the responsibility is on us to make a better world. So
thank you guys. It was a pleasure. Yeah. And we stay available for everybody that wants to reach out.
Yeah, feel free to ask questions on the platform. Simone, if you feel inclined, we can give you a user account and you can answer some questions, or however it would be best to engage with you. Of course, first and foremost, check out the website and get all access to those resources. Watch the video twice, because the first time isn't enough. I definitely will have to watch it again to catch everything. And
yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Stina and Simone and Bilal. I'm really glad this was recorded because I also feel like I'd want to listen again and really absorb and reflect, and hopefully have more discussions with all of you soon.
Thank
So
you,
thanks.
guys. Good luck, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Look forward to talking again soon.
you guys,
Ciao.
we'll put the recording up shortly.
Ciao.
Salam. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks,
Bye.
Soha. Thanks, Michaela. Thanks, Dara. Thanks, George. Thanks, Zuka. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Hiba. Thanks, Maya. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Hadi. Thanks, Dara. Thanks.